My name is Julie Summer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Drake Education Fund. On behalf of the Board of Directors, thank you all for coming today. To all of you who made possible the attendance of our graduate and undergraduate students in the room with generous gifts, you are listed on our front screen and on our program. These young people are the next generation of sports lawyers, sport management professionals, and journalists, and we thank you for your generosity. Just a few housekeeping comments. In the center of each table are instructions on accessing your complimentary internet connection. We ask that you silence your cell phones, but they can be used to access panelist bios and other content. If you look at the back cover of your program, which I don't have with me, hold up the program, point your phone to the lower left corner, where the QR code is, and the QR code will connect you to the drakeeducationfund.org website, where you see the table of contents and you can access the panelists' biographies and other information mentioned during the program. All materials located on the website will continue to be available after the program. We're respecting the climate and saving trees by using electronic access to documents, enabling us to keep printed programs to a minimum. Because you can access panelist bios at any time, our introduction to the panelists will be brief. The theme of this year's conference is the college athlete, more than a marketplace. We're focusing on the impacts of NIL and sports betting on college athletes, as well as the importance of their health and well-being. The intense pressures college athletes face today lead to new stressors and demands on every aspect of the college experience. In addition to existing pressures, we aim to explore the impact of recent developments like sports betting, with the rise of social media, conference realignments, and the evolving name, image, and likeness landscape on college athletes' mental health and identify effective solutions. You will hear from sports industry experts, academic experts, former players, journalists, and education and government leaders who are questioning these realities. All of these moderators and speakers are donating their time to be here and share their expertise, and we are so grateful for their participation in the 2024 SAC Symposium. Our symposium finds its perfect partner this year at Howard University, a beacon of HBCU excellence, highlighting our alignment and reflecting our dedication to amplifying their voices in the fight. And we're thrilled to have the Bison Athletic Department as our host partner for our national discussion on college sport reform. Sponsoring 21 teams and serving 500 athletes, the largest program among all HBCUs, has flourished under the leadership of Carrie Davis since 2015. Bison athletes have excelled on the playing fields, achieving high graduation rates and GPAs in the classroom, and engaging in numerous community partnerships. We have asked one of the most respected and successful athletic administrators in the country to make opening remarks. Please welcome Bison Director of Athletics, Carrie Davis.
Thank you, Julia. I was turning around expecting to see somebody else up here.
Sports and Entertainment Lawyer of the Year Award. We are honored to have a stellar slate of equity and mental health advocates as panelists, experts who know what college athletes need to succeed in their current challenging landscape. To Jeremy's left is Christine Baker-Smith. I'm sorry, I said Nita Daniels. A sociologist, Christine Baker-Smith, a sociologist who helps communities make decisions based on equity outcomes as the Director of Research for the National League of Cities. Anita Daniels, also a panelist, as a past president of the Alliance of Social Workers in Sport, she is a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in behavioral health and addiction counseling. Taylor McFall, the assistant director at Vanderbilt University's Student Athlete Success Center. Throughout her career, Taylor has worked to empower college athletes by helping them realize their strengths outside of sport. And last, Jalen Williamson, an NFL Players Association Player Affairs Coordinator, also a former quarterback for Hampton University. He's served as the Player Engagement Fellow for the Los Angeles Rams and in the Player Engagement Department for the Washington Commanders. Now please welcome our moderator, Jeremy Duru.
Thank you, Julie, very much. Are you hearing me? Is my mic on? Great. Thank you, Julie, for the kind introduction. And thank you, Julie, Donna, the entire board for hosting the symposium. The Drake Group has, for a long time, been a real beacon in the space, and it continues to be so. So we, on this first panel, are talking about collegiate athlete health and well-being. And I think it's fair to say that we are in a crisis moment. And it's important exploring this moment that we have these folks on the panel with us, because as Julie pointed out, truly they are experts. I'd like to begin, if we could, with you, Anita. And let me begin by rattling off some startling statistics from a recent NCAA student-athlete well-being survey. Roughly 30% of collegiate athletes, quote, felt so depressed that it was difficult to function. This is a 2022 survey. Fewer than half of collegiate athletes felt it would be comfortable for them to seek support from mental health providers on campus. Only 53% of collegiate athletes reported that their coaches take mental health concerns seriously. So these are startling and frightening statistics, quite frankly. Anita, what would you say are the most significant impediments for college athletes in accessing professional mental health support?
I will say, in thinking about the athletes that I serve, a lot of them only have access to the counseling center on campus. And that counseling center may have 6 staff. And so when you think about the entire student population that has to be served by the counseling center, that can create a challenge. The other issue for athletes is that many of them do not want to be seen going to the counseling center. And so, fortunately for the athletes that I serve in North Carolina, I serve the athletes at Duke, they have a chance to see me. I'm off campus, so they don't have to run into anyone. And I have a lot of them that feel comfortable because I'm not on campus, and it's an opportunity for them to take advantage of the resources that are available to them in the community. And I think that's wonderful. More and more of them are seeking counseling for anxiety, depression, and a lot of stress.
You mentioned being off campus. So I guess one dynamic is on campus or off campus. Another dynamic is whether the mental health professional works for the institution or not. Question of independence. Could you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yes, I am independent, which makes it a lot easier for the staff and for the athletes, because the staff are concerned that they may receive calls from professors, from coaches. I don't receive those calls. And so I think the athletes appreciate that, even though I am aware of who their coaches are. If anyone, I might talk to an athletic trainer, or I might talk to a physician, but I do not talk to the coaches. The coaches do not reach out to me. And so that makes the athletes feel comfortable that what they share with me, even though we say things are confidential, and they should be, but I think for them, it really is confidential because they don't have to worry about me running into a coach on campus.
Okay. And I'm assuming, so that sounds like an ideal situation for the student athletes. I'm assuming there are universities where that doesn't exist, where the only mental health professional, sports psychologist that they can go to is affiliated with the university. Now, perhaps they could use their own resources to find others, but they're in a new city, they're not familiar with the environs. What does a student athlete do in that dynamic? Are there any best practices among institution-employed sports psychologists with respect to counseling student athletes who are playing for the teams that are part of the institution that employs the sports psychologist?
At Duke and North Carolina Central, the staff do reach out directly to the clinician. the athletes ask for a specific kind of skill or experience that the clinician may have. I have had some athletes that wanted someone who could focus on spirituality. And so then they look for a clinician who offers that. The other thing is the faculty athletic representative at North Carolina Central is very committed to student well-being. And so she reaches out to me often to say, Anita, I have someone who needs your help. And just knowing that they have someone that they can turn to, and they do not call me back to say, did they show up? Did you help them? They can tell the change in the athlete and know that things have improved.
One more question for you before we move on. One thing that all of us who have been involved in athletics, personally, or been involved in the oversight role in athletics, know about athletics, is people get injured. And it's one of the heartbreaking parts of athletics. And a lot of research suggests that the students at greatest risk of mental health challenge and mental health crises are student athletes who are injured. One is a consequence of the injury.
Focus more on my career goals versus my athletic goals. And so that's another area that we focus on when they have an injury. Some of them return, some do not, and most of the ones who do not return are okay with the fact that they've decided to transition and focus more on career long-term.
I have one more question. I hope it's okay. Because you just made me think about something. You mentioned that most, student athletes want to play their sport. There's also the dynamic, we certainly see it in youth sport, in high school sport, where student athletes, the kids and the student athletes, don't really want to play the sport. It's the parents or community urging them to play the sport. And sometimes urging them to play the sport as a way to get to college, as a way to finance college. Sometimes urging them to play the sport because it makes the parents feel good. Hey, I've raised this tremendous athlete. Have you come across students who come to you because they don't want to play the sport anymore?
Yes, and the nice thing about being an adult, I tell my athletes, the nice thing about being an adult is you get to say yes and you get to say no, even if it's your parents. Once you turn 18, you get to make those decisions. And we talk about how they're going to have that conversation with their parents. And most of them feel comfortable when they make the decision to transition from being an athlete. Like, I just do not enjoy playing the sport anymore. And they should not be forced to do that if they're not interested anymore. And I've helped them, sometimes have those conversations, or we practice, we role play. I'm your mom, tell me what you want to say, I'm going to give you a hard time, but they get through it and feel comfortable knowing that, yes, I can have this conversation and I can move on to what I want to do after sport.
Great, thank you, Anita. Taylor, can we come to you, please?
Sure.
So with Anita, we were just talking a little bit about, the dynamic that exists in high school as student athletes then transition to college. So going to high school, one dynamic that exists, I think most of us are likely familiar with, is that at many institutions, Division I, Division II, and Division III institutions, perhaps more so at the higher levels of collegiate athletics, higher levels, Division I, but there's certainly this dynamic that talented athletes are sometimes given an opportunity to attend the university and participate in sport when they may be somewhat underprepared to do so. So a referral is made by the coach, and the standards are lowered a little bit for some student athletes, which is a fantastic thing in my view as a general matter, because it provides an opportunity for folks who might not have had a chance to get to that level of academic opportunity without it. But it would seem to me it only works if indeed these student athletes are truly supported. And so I'd like to talk to you first of all about that dynamic. If you think it's a dynamic that's beneficial for the student athlete, perhaps we should be in a world where there isn't that sort of referral system that exists. But in that it does exist, could you talk a little bit about the extent to, in your research and your understanding, as a general matter, student athletes are or are not really prepared for the academic rigors when they're referred?
It's a loaded question.
Yeah, sorry.
I mean, I think in general right now, any student coming into college is not prepared. I mean, the kids that are coming into college right now, these are our COVID kids. So they've spent the past 3 to 4 to 5, however many years learning online. So, and let's be honest, learning online is not as intrusive as learning in the classroom. So they have to come in and, you know, their brains are not fully developed until they're 25. So they're coming into an institution where they're being told you have to critically think, you have to do all of these things, you have to be able to think outside the box. They can barely think outside of their own self at that point. So I think we really have to adjust our expectations and meet them where they're at. And where they're at is that an 18-year-old kid who may developmentally be at the level of a 14 to 15-year-old. So I think there's that. But then I couple that with the fact that I work at Vanderbilt, which is the top, like, number 13 university in the country. So we have student athletes that come in. I work with the men's basketball program. And there is that stigma that they are getting in on a favor or whatnot, which is definitely not the case. Our student athletes get in just like the rest of the general student population, but sometimes there is this convincing the student athlete of you are worthy of being here. You bring a special gift to the table that the top 2% are able to bring. Don't let the fact that you have a gift on the court deter you from getting past, like, you bring the gift to the classroom as well. So I think it's just constant conversation with them of, like, you are worthy of being here. You got in just like everybody else, and you hold space in this room.
You mentioned COVID, and we've all had to adjust in many different ways. We talked about the fact that everybody's coming in unprepared to some extent because of the COVID years while they were in high school. Are there best practices, you would go with Vanderbilt, that have been instituted university-wide to really address the particular deficiencies that are consequent to COVID? And then secondly, whether or not that's the case, is there anything else done in the athletic department with respect to support services in that regard?
So I think in terms of university-wide, I think Vanderbilt's very unique in the sense we don't offer online classes. So everything that we do is in person. So they are forced to get real with in-person learning. We have, I think it's like an 8-to-1 faculty to student ratio. So we have very close relationships. The faculty are very ingrained in our students. But in terms of the athletic department and what we do in the Ingram Center, like from the beginning of the recruitment process till well after graduation, we are hands on deck with them. We are so involved. We let them know, like, what resources do you need? And here are some resources that you didn't think that you needed. And we make sure that they have what they need for every step of the journey. We're super fortunate at Vanderbilt to be able to provide those resources. Prior to coming to Vanderbilt, I worked at low resource institutions at the FCS level and the FBS level. And at that point, it becomes creative organizing on behalf of the staff members. So, when I was at an FCS level program, I was spending half of my paycheck giving back to the student athletes to make sure that they had the resources that they needed.
Great. That sounds fantastic. It's interesting, and it sounds like what's going on at Vanderbilt really is gold standard. Last year at the Allen Sack National Symposium, we had a conversation about a different national university, which we don't need the name, although it's all over the papers, where there was an academic scandal where student athletes were, first of all, by the university's, pursuant to the university's own records, admitted when they were well below the standard of what other students were required. Secondly, once there, were strongly encouraged or forced, depending on whose version of the story it is, into non-rigorous courses so that they would stay eligible. There's a huge 130-page report about it. It was a big national news. So my question is, you've described Vanderbilt, and we've got that other dynamic that was discussed last year. Perhaps these are the two ends of the spectrum. Where do you think most schools fall along the spectrum?
I think, just from my experience of working, like I said, at other institutions besides Vanderbilt, yeah, there are some students who get in on exception, and right or wrong, it is what happens. I think at Vanderbilt, we're at the higher end of the exception, where that's not something that we're able to do. But at state schools that I have worked at, we have been able to get students in on exceptions who come in underprepared. At one school I was at, I had a student athlete that came in with an ACT score of 13. And so there again, we can get into the whole conversation about standardized testing. Is that a reflection of someone's intellect? To which I say no. But, a 13 is a pretty glaring number. Also being at that institution that doesn't have a lot of resources, we didn't have a lot of money to be able to provide the student with the accommodations that they needed to be successful there.
Yeah, so there's a spectrum indeed.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a spectrum.
Let me ask this. So we speak of resources. On multiple occasions, college athletes have come out nationally and said, the resources are there, but my coach has me so tightly wound and structured, I can't get to it. Can we talk a little bit about that? What sort of power, authority does your office and your colleagues have in comparison to the coaches when it comes to these issues?
Definitely not enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it all starts back with, in me and my role as the academic coordinator for men's basketball. It's me getting in with that coaching staff and saying, I'm an extension of your staff. I may not work directly for you, but I'm here to help carry out your philosophy as well. And so letting them know that I'm not there to be, just a thorn in his side. Like, I'm there to help you, but I also need you to help me. And making sure that we're on the same page of that. And so developing that relation, I think it all just becomes relationship building at that point. That way, when I call the coach and say, hey, I know the guys are scheduled for lift at this time, but this is the only time that we have blocks for tutoring today, that they can get it. Can we do some switching? And so it's like being able to talk to him about that freely. But also, I think it goes back to just the relationship with the student athlete of yeah, I know you're pressed for time. I get it. But this has to be done. Let's sit down and figure out a way to get it done. And I think, too, meeting them where they are. So if the only time that they're available is at 8 p.m., that's what I've got to do to help them get where they need to go. But I think that also feeds back into another larger issue in college athletics of supporting our support staffs. Because I think a lot of the times our support staffs, academics, athletic training, strength and conditioning, we're kind of pushed to the wayside. And we're just the behind the scenes people, and we don't get the recognition or the payment that we deserve.
Yeah. Fantastic. And I imagine with respect to this question as well, there's a spectrum. Different institutions handle the relationship differently, and different coaches likely handle it differently. Great. Thank you so much, Taylor. Christine, can we move to you? So one thing that's notable about your work, that was discussed a little bit in the intro, but I think merits further discussion, is your expertise with respect to food and shelter insecurity, generally, but for collegiate athletes, which I think is something that isn't really discussed enough. I think there's a presumption that there's not scarcity in those regards. So could you tell us a little bit, just first of all, what food and shelter insecurity is?
Sure. So when we usually talk about food and shelter security, at this point in the field, we talk about it as basic needs security. And it includes not just food and shelter, but access to adequate transportation, as well as dependent care and other resources you need in order to live the life you want to live. And just the basics, right? Food and shelter are pretty basic. When we talk about food insecurity, we're using a measure designed by the USDA, and it is used across the board by all organizations. And what it asks is questions like, did you worry about having enough food to eat today? Did you skip meals or skip other expenses in order to have enough money to eat? And then there's a whole separate section for people who have children that asks questions about parents and says to the parent, did you skip meals so your children could eat, for example? With housing insecurity, this is a tricky one, and I'm going to be an advocate here for what we have been pushing for. Housing insecurity does not just mean sleeping in it, being homeless, and being in a tent on the street. We're also talking about things like couch surfing. And the big, broad question you ask when you say, is a student housing insecure is, did they know where they were going to sleep tonight? And was that stable and safe? So a victim of domestic violence may know where they're. And here's the really important housing insecurity for college students. Technically, all college students are housing insecure if they are living in dorms. Because this question asks about a period of time. It says, over the last few months, did you have a night where you didn't know where you were going to sleep? Did you have a night where you were worried about being able to pay your expenses like utilities? That's housing insecure versus homeless. These students, if they live in dorms, have to leave the dorm for a month in the winter break. They have to leave the dorms for 3 months in the summer. They're adults. If they're not your traditional student, and we all know that the majority of college athletes are not the 22-year-old who's attending college on a trust fund, they may not have a home to go home to during those breaks. That makes them housing insecure. And in fact, what we find is the average housing insecurity rate for college students is about 40% for students actually identifying as housing insecure. College athletes is about 15 to 20%, so it's better, but we're still talking about 1 out of 5 student athletes who say, I don't feel safe or stable in my home. And 25% of them report being food insecure. And our critics often say, well, yeah, but NCAA has done a lot of work to make sure that student athletes always have access to food. You know, the Div 1 athletes have a kitchen and unlimited meals and all of that. That's Div 1 athletes. At the other divisions and the 2-year colleges, those resources don't exist. And in fact, we see the difference between Div 1 and the other divisions in terms of food insecurity.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? I think, even among Division I athletes, you've got, I think there's probably, among some there's a sense, Division I athletes got a full scholarship, everything's taken care of, you're in good shape. When so many Division I athletes don't have full scholarships, don't have partial scholarships, and so
institution. That the $19,000 doesn't come to the student, it's for tuition and fees. So what exactly do they do for spending money? What exactly do they do if they're a student who's helping with their family's finances outside of school? About 70% of student athletes report that they are working as well at some point in the last year. And we all know there's seasonality with sports, but this means that possibly while they're playing, and even if they're not playing, they're working to make ends meet. So $19,000 goes to room and board. We're not talking about spending money. We're not talking about transportation money for the majority of students who actually don't live on campus. And then we have the partial and non-existent scholarships. So for example, all of our students who play at a 2-year school, what we call in the Northeast, which was a thing I learned when I moved here, the junior college, there almost never are scholarships there for those athletes. So they are attending college full-time in order to get their financial aid and playing sports. And those students in particular, community college students, about 75% of them are working while attending college. So talk about time poverty. It's a real thing. And we're asking, these students are not being paid to go to college. They are receiving an academic scholarship. It's technically an academic scholarship, if they're getting one at all.
And indeed, student athletes can be getting one, and then the next year not be getting it.
What happens if they get injured?
You're injured. The scholarships are renewable. You can negotiate to have full eligibility time on scholarship, but oftentimes it's 1 year renewable, and so you've got situations where perhaps you have stability and it devolves into lack of stability in the following year. Christine, have there been any, are you familiar with any studies that link food security and insecurity among college athletes to mental health challenges? I imagine so.
It's a huge issue. Not specifically, there are no studies that I'm aware of specifically around athletes, but my area of expertise is a little bit broader. We know that food, and actually more importantly, housing insecurity, is heavily related to mental health stability. And yes, it goes both ways. We all know that many people who have struggle with mental health become homeless, but it can also go the other way, which is having housing insecurity can significantly impact your mental health. And it's a nasty cycle that if you don't get support services for that mental health question in the beginning, it's very easy to see it fall apart.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, go to you, Jason. And also let me say, I think we want this to be a conversation, so we'll go to the audience for questions if you have any as the session progresses. And so if you've got questions, think about it because we'll come to you as we move forward. Okay, Jalen. So you played quarterback at Hampton. Now, I didn't see you heckling Kerry at all during his whole intro about Howard University and all that stuff. You stayed quiet there at the end.
I was about to say, I'm in foreign territory a little bit right now. It's okay. I'm excited. It's a blessing to be here.
Yeah, I've heard the debates of which is the real HU.
I would say, but
so you played quarterback at Hampton and had a great career there. And there's so many student athletes who have had great careers collegiately, and then collegiate athletics finishes, and they don't have the opportunity for whatever reason to play at the next level. For many, anecdotally and according to studies, it's crushing. It can be crushing.
absolutely.
Could you talk a little bit about what you've observed, both as a collegiate athlete and friend of other collegiate athletes, and now we'll talk a little bit more about what you do now in the professional space. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. I can say I'm a testament to as well, going through that experience, finishing off school and trying to figure out what's next. One thing I would say that was huge for me, or I'll try to share with others too as well, try to prepare yourself as early as possible. It's challenging because it's something you've been doing your entire life. It suddenly comes to an end in your collegiate career. It's difficult, it's challenging, but at the same time, it's an opportunity for something next in life, next journey, wherever you're interested in. So I always try to be an advocate of try to prepare yourself as early as possible, whether it's later in high school, early in your collegiate career. Try to figure out what exactly are you interested in, what do you like to do, what do you actually want to be involved in when you finish up. I personally, I was a huge advocate of sports. I went through many trials and tribulations throughout my career, and I had an injury my senior year to kind of sideline me, to kind of give me a chance to really sit back and kind of see how I want to go about things. I was blessed with the opportunity to kind of take a step back and see what will possibly be my next step. Everyone don't have the opportunity sometimes. Sometimes it comes pretty quick, abruptly, but at the same time, I will always be an advocate of try to prepare yourself as early as possible for what's next in life.
So that's interesting. You spoke of preparing yourself, which is clearly important. But it begs a question, should the onus be on the athlete to do the preparation? That is to say, should there be a burden on the institution to begin preparing the athlete, whether they like it or not, from the beginning of their athletic eligibility? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, it takes collective group from the coaches to the academic support to the professors going to the office hours and trying to figure out how you can actually enhance yourself as much as possible each and every day to maximize your opportunity while you're on a collegiate campus, on a college campus. There's so many resources that are available, but at the same time, it's on the athlete, but it's on the institution as well. I think it's go hand in hand. Of course, the institution wants what's best for the athlete at all times, but the athlete has to want what's best for them too as well. It's a two-way street, two-way road, but at the same time, it's this opportunity for not only the athlete but the institution to try to see how they can enhance their resources and different programs, different things they have in place for athletes' success after they finish that career.
Great. Can we talk about, a few times during the course of this conversation this morning, we've talked about the head coach.
Mm-hmm.
So can we talk about the head coach? I mean, when we, it's unfortunate, but I'd say that it's probably not a month that goes by where there isn't a national story about some sort of abuse on the part of the head coach. Whether it's physical, emotional, mental, sexual. Head coaches are kind of put on this pedestal. I think even from the time that we're all children, and sometimes that can be used to abuse. And so I guess I'd ask you, what role, responsibility does the head? We all know that head coach has a responsibility not to engage in that behavior, but what role does the head coach play in ensuring that the student athlete, the collegiate athlete, truly is a collegiate athlete? So not just an athlete, but a college student.
It's vital. They play a vital role. When a kid decides to come to a university, your parents, you're basically turning them over to your head coach to basically watch over your child. I think they play a vital role, and unfortunately, sometimes that does happen. Abuse does happen. They do go a little too far sometimes. You hear many stories that comes out, unfortunately, but I think that it's up to the university to make sure that you have the right coaches in place. Make sure you do a great, thorough investigation background. Make sure you have the right people in place to really care about the athletes. I personally haven't had any experiences of any conduct, anything done as far as any abuse or anything like that, or going over the line or overstepping any boundaries. But people I've been involved with have been at the utmost caring, respectful, trying to see others succeed, and selfless. So I think we need more of that throughout collegiate space. Of course, like I say, things does happen, things do occur sometimes, but I think it's important for the head coach to have that mindset too as well, that we're trying to win games, but at the same time we're trying to develop student athletes, and we're trying to develop people for society today, and I think that that really trickles down across all divisions, all sports, and it really plays a difference in these kids' lives.
Great, thank you, Jalen. I'd like to talk now, and I'd like for all of us to engage in, about something that I suspect will come up later on today, and was referenced earlier, and is a huge, but huge part of collegiate athletics now, ever increasing, and that's NIL. That's NIL. So if we were sitting here having this conversation just 2 years ago, we wouldn't be even talking about this. But now it's impossible to talk about collegiate athletics without talking about it. So let's talk about it. And Anita, maybe we can start with you. There have been reports of the consequence of the emergence of NIL as being both a positive for student athlete mental well-being and a negative. Have you in your work engaged with student athletes about NIL? Could you talk a little bit about the consequences for them?
Yes, it is a positive and a negative, particularly for those athletes who, thinking about the negative, do not have anyone that's approaching them saying, here's an opportunity for you. For those who have those opportunities, it is a positive. At the same time, I am concerned that, again, the focus shifts from my academics to
If I can't make it to the pros, can I make money this way? And while I want them to have opportunities to make money, I also want them to be safe. And when they start stressing about not having a contract and the possibility of not going to the pros, then again, we run into situations where they are stressed out and they are not performing in the classroom the way they would like to. And then they have other family matters that they deal with as well, because, you know, family members see NIL as an opportunity. And so that's the other thing that I find the athletes having to decide. Do I want to be involved in this, and how much is it going to impact me if I say yes to someone?
Thank you, Anita. And you talked about kind of academic performance. Let's go to you, Taylor, with that, which is, I guess I'd ask about the impact specific on academic performance. I mean, before NIL, there was a perspective that some student athletes have that, I've got to focus on making it to the pros. I'll get a payday there, and that trumps everything as my priority, and then academics will suffer. And now it would seem there's another dynamic that Anita made reference to, which is, okay, maybe I won't make the pros, but if I can get my following up and endorse enough products here in college, then I'll get my payday there. And so even those who aren't aspiring to be professional athletes may be turning away from academics toward social media.
I get a cut of it and all of this stuff. So I think we're just like in this interesting world. It's like a running joke in our like office of like, I go to my coworkers and I was like, I'm gonna quit. I'm gonna become a TikTok influencer. Catch y'all like never. Like I'm out of here. But with the student athletes, like this is the materials that they're consuming. They're constantly on social media seeing this, and so for them it's like a quick buck. It's quick, fast money. And so, talking to them of like, yes, you can make quick, fast money from this. But the way that, we go about trying to frame NIL is like, NIL is a living, breathing resume. This is a living, breathing testament of your brand, which will last longer than any professional playing career. It takes into consideration your education. And so that's something that, within academics, within our Ingram Center and our student athlete development and NIL, group, that we tell them, make these connections in the community, within our Vanderbilt network, what have you, and let's continue to build that resume so that when you leave here, you don't need to fall back on trying to make a quick buck. The money's going to come to you.
Great, that's great. Christine, can we come to you? Because when NIL was born of this sense that collegiate athletes are participating in athletics, the same way collegiate athletes were participating in athletics a century ago. But a century ago, nobody's making money, and now everybody's making money except the collegiate athletes. And so the idea is, how do the collegiate athletes make money? And Carrie mentioned, the Dartmouth basketball players who have unionized. So one approach is to unionize under the National Labor Relations Act and try to collectively bargain and make money that way. But before that, we had the California State Legislature say, California schools, you can't prohibit student athletes from leveraging their name, image, and likeness. And every other state, almost every other state, because they didn't want to be undone, recruiting-wise, did the same thing. Yep. And so we've got this national landscape of individual states with different rules allowing people to, preventing schools from preventing student athletes from leveraging their NIL. So it came from the idea of this will even the playing field, allow student athletes to profit from this business. So someone might make the argument, hey, this is the answer to food and housing and security for student athletes. Can you speak to that, Christine?
I haven't heard that term, but it makes total sense. So I think the first thing that I always think about, I'm a statistics person. I know many of you in the room are as well. We all like our sports. The percentage of students who actually are going to have the opportunity to engage in that. It's what Anita said. Let's take baseball. There are 36,000 student athletes who play baseball. A tiny fraction of them get into the AAA. Not even a percentage point get into the pros direct from college. So the likelihood that you are somebody that a company is going to want to pay to be an influencer is so small. And then it has students chasing this concept that to me, I find that part very frustrating, particularly, and then there's another piece to this, particularly with NIL, which is, I'm not sure what's going on. There we go. It sensed my agitation. Which is that we're talking about students who are 18 to 25 years old. And as Taylor just said, we know that the human brain isn't fully developed till you're 25. And now we're putting all of these players into, the ones who do have the opportunity, into a situation where they're negotiating contracts. I find it hard to believe that an 18 to 25-year-old knows how to make sure they have proper representation and or properly understand the long-term impacts of a contract that they would sign at that time. So I think it's a really dangerous space. There are all kinds of issues with the idea of paying athletes as employees, as our host mentioned. On the other hand, that might be a little bit more equitable for all of the athletes and allow for there to be some representation from folks who have experience and expertise who have been around a little bit longer than 25 years.
Yeah, and that's one of the arguments for the unionization of the pay for play is the NIL benefits only a very tiny fraction, to your point, Christine, of student athletes. I work at a Patriot League school, and the Patriot League, most NIL deals I think are just for 50% off products. I mean, it's not even money. It's not even money. So but you're right that people chase it, thinking that it can be more, which can create an unfortunate cycle and exactly stressful situation, downward spiral. Jalen, to you on this. My first question is: do you wish NIL existed while you were playing?
Of course. I wrote so many reports on how I wish student athletes would get paid, and to see it come to fruition now was implicated in that. It's
broadly speaking, football players, from the baseball players or the golfers or whatever. But it also, it would seem, potentially divides the starting quarterback from the second string left tackle. And so how do you believe that this would impact or is impacting, I guess I'll say, the student athlete community on the school's campus, but more directly the locker room?
I think it will impact it, pretty greatly. I think that from an aspect that I look at it from a professional standpoint, that's kind of like the first contract I would see. It's similar to the NFL though. Professional first starting quarterback might make a little bit more different than second string left tackle, but I think that it's needed within college sports, preparing these athletes for transition. I know, just like I say, personally, I was working working in college in the off season, trying to figure out how to make ends meet and trying to figure out how we can, just try to bring some type of revenue in. So I think it gives everyone a buffer, but within the athlete community, I think everyone is on board of NIL and seeing how they can actually maximize as much as possible.
And we've seen, to the point of dividing the locker room, we've seen some institutions benefit from NIL collectives that pay the whole squad. So I think the Utah football team, everybody got a truck.
They do the same.
Yeah, and so everybody's on the same. Doesn't mean that Utah starting quarterback can't get more, but there's a floor. I'd love to open it up to the room if there are questions. If you could toss up your hand, we might have a roving mic somewhere. Yeah, if we could go here, it'd be great.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Kevin Winsing. Earlier, the athletic director for Howard mentioned that the NCAA was looking at maybe unionizing, college sports. So I was going to maybe go to you, Mr. Williams, on the NFL Players Association and the whole panel on what aspects, or what could you guys lend to the the NCAA, and say, here's how you should go about unionizing if you decide to do that, and all the other aspects that should maybe be considered in that.
It's a little, with unionized within the collegiate space, it's a little more in depth. I think we touched upon it last night. It depends upon the not unionized per sport of each college. It's so in depth when it comes to it. I think it's something that's needed though within college sports. If you figure out the landscape and how we can actually implement it across the country, I think it'll be awesome. From a union standpoint, we try to make sure we bargain as much as possible for our athletes. I think every college campus now that they're receiving name, image, and likeness opportunity, I think that is something that should be implemented across the board.
Other thoughts?
I would agree with that if that's what is going to happen, because again, you have those situations where my scholarship is full and yours is 10%. And if we can even the playing field for all the athletes, if we're going down the street, then I think that makes more sense. But I also agree that we need to have someone there to help them manage, understand the contracts, understand how to manage the resources that they will be receiving, because, I think about what you said. So 3 months I'm not in school. How am I going to make sure that if I receive funding that it can last me until I get back? And so those kinds of things, I think if we're going down that street, we have to consider helping the athletes manage their resources in a healthy way.
I think too, just like looking at it, because I look at it through the lens of men's college basketball. We all know that there's this dirty underworld where there's handlers, and these handlers are doing these under-the-table discussions with schools prior to a student athlete even getting there. And so I think cutting the handlers out, completely, and so having each institution have their own representative who is able to look at these documents, who's able to, advocate for the student athlete to make sure that they're receiving the resources that they need to maintain their health and wellness while playing at that institution. And then that way you're cutting out someone who's getting between 10 to 20% of a cut of this student athlete's NIL that they're coming when they're coming to school there.
Yeah, other questions?
Hi, Tammy Gott. I'm going to throw a bit of a pot stirring question in, so anybody can jump in if they'd like. When we look at states that are passing some of these really hostile anti-DEI legislation, we know that support for young people in general and everyone is better and more effective when the people giving the support look like or can relate to the situations of these college athletes. What are you seeing, or are you concerned about either the movement towards these ridiculous laws or just fallout from them?
I'm concerned about the laws, and I'm also concerned about the fallout, because there have been student athletes. I work with student athletes and some professionals, but some of them say, do you have a black female who is spiritual that can talk to me about the Bible? Well, if there's no one there to answer that question, that student may not get to me. And it's important for people, especially when it comes to mental health and addictions, it's feeling that there's a connection between you and that person in order for you to feel you can be successful. And if you can't relate to my life and what I've been through and what I may have experienced, then I think it really is going to create some serious issues. And when we think about the revenue generating sports, a lot of those athletes are my complexion. And so I'm very concerned for them.
Christine.
And he was talking about sense of belonging. This is something that I spent a lot of time studying, and one of the things we know, it actually goes all the way back to your comment about student athletes being comfortable getting support, whether it's academic, whether it's mental health, whether it's physical health on campus. And the campuses that are doing this well create a space where students feel known and understood and supported. And that means the whole student, not just the fact that they're an athlete, not just the fact that they are an A student. And if we're taking away these programs that were intended to help others understand who those students are, we're taking away the student's sense of belonging.
So, interesting question, Tammy. It creates interesting dynamic, which I think puts, in some ways, more power in the high school athlete than there has ever been. Because when Florida stripped its DEI office, Emmett Smith came out and questioned whether student athletes should go to Florida. The mayor of Birmingham did the same on Alabama, and the president of NAACP has cautioned, student athletes to go to states with these horrible legislative efforts. And so a student athlete, without having to, put their neck on the line with any sort of formal protest, can just decide, I'm going to go to Maryland instead of Alabama. If that happens enough, then that legislation will be pulled back. I mean, it's hard to imagine. It's really, it's hard to imagine that these legislatures are going to want the blowback of a state full of sports fans seeing their state athletic accomplishments at the university level fall to nothing because all the recruits are going elsewhere. It's a very interesting dynamic.
Framed that way, these athletes have power.
They really do, more than they think about.
A lot of power there. Yeah, I think I saw some other hands over here.
No, I need a mic. Yeah, my name's Keith Haney, and so my question's to Anita, but I think each of you all will be able to speak on this matter. And I recall when Anita, ventured into this area and being familiar with the schools that she works with, Duke and North Carolina Central, and the need at that time, and the growing need even more so now. Where are we at in terms of it being more of you guys available for the athletes? Because I know it's not enough of you based on the need. And how does awareness continue to, increase or grow?
I will say that more universities are recruiting people to work directly with the athletes because, as I said, they do not feel comfortable going to the counseling center on campus. And so a lot of the colleges and universities are hiring people. One idea that I have in mind, so anyone who would like to support it, I'd be happy to talk to you, but looking at creating a pool of clinicians that at least can support the colleges and universities, including the junior colleges in North Carolina. I will be happy to run that team of clinicians that we can make sure that these athletes from junior college to 4-year to wherever they're going next, that they have a clinician that they can meet with and talk to and feel comfortable. Because if there's not someone that's not connected to student counseling services, then those athletes are probably not going to have anyone to converse with unless they have a coach that might be able to support them or an instructor that might say, here's someone to speak to. So it is so stressful. I don't know if any of you know what it feels like to be on blast, but everything you do is being scrutinized. That is a lot of pressure for someone that's 18 to 22 years old. It's just a lot. And however we can support them, that's what I would like to see us do, is bring those resources. So I don't know what's happening with others, but I will say, at least at the schools that I'm involved with, they are now trying to recruit people who work directly with athletics, and that has made a tremendous difference.
I'm a huge advocate as well of mental health. I just wanted to add on to as well. I think that personally, just seeing the landscape of college sports and seeing on the professional side too as well, I feel like just every sport, every college needs a mental health clinician, some type of team mental health clinician. Like, it's imperative, it's vital. As you mentioned, you have no idea what these young adults are going through on the daily, from class to trying to manage their schedule, trying to make sure they're, waste, make sure they go to meetings, practice. It's so much you have to endure on a daily. I think that it's vital to talk to someone and be able to speak to someone, a professional mental health clinician.
One other thing that I wanted to add, because I think this is important as I talk about all the different things that I do, but I also conduct forensic evaluations for the courts in Durham. And there was a person that I had to do his forensic evaluation. He actually played at a junior college and the Fort family.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I'm at Vanderbilt, so we're extremely lucky. We have a staff of 3 psychologists that work directly with our student athletes, and we also have an excellent partnership with our University Counseling Center. So our student athletes will go see them over there. But I think too, just, I've been at institutions, we don't have those resources. And so, training your staff on like QPR training, just basic things like that, with something train, what is it?
Yeah, it's QRP.
Yeah, okay, there we go. Basically, it's just recognizing the symptoms and then referring out. So, a lot of these coaches are former student athletes themselves. So their vernacular is like extremely limited when it comes to mental health. And then you tack on, a lot of them are Black and brown men, also extremely limited on how we approach mental health. And so being able to provide your staff as a whole with these resources to be able to train and, just recognize that someone may be going through something, I think would be key.
Yeah, I think there was a hand in the very back there.
Hey friends, my name is Dr. Jen Fry, so I run Jen Fry Talks. We sit at the intersection of conflict and culture. And just kind of a few things I wanted to say in complete agreement. Athletes have power. It's not even about if an athlete went to another school. If Florida football said we are not going to play unless DEI legislation is back, guess what would happen? I guarantee that it would be back. And athletes forget the amount of power, both media-wise and then monetary, they bring. So I think that's a big thing to always think about. I think the second thing when we talk about mental health, to me, the undergirdle that we always miss out on is trauma. Y'all are traumatized. The staff are traumatized. You up there are traumatized from COVID. All of those things are bubbling up to the surface, and our athletes can't handle it. We are not built to handle this amount of trauma, this extended. So then what do we do with our athletes? And then we go to the pro sports, and they've never dealt with their trauma. And so now these pro athletes are on a bigger screen with everyone now on them, and they have to make money, and people are in their DMs, and the trauma is surfacing with domestic violence, suicide ideations, all of these things that keep leveling up. So how do we as college sports start centering trauma and getting our athletes to start noticing and talking about it, and also training our staff to talk about trauma? Because if we don't, trauma is not an easy heal. I live in Baltimore, right? It is not, it may be, it's not easy. And there's a great movie called The Body of Politic. Y'all should see that, it's phenomenal. But trauma is not an easy heal. So how do we start helping our athletes with this trauma so that we can help them be better humans and not hurt themselves in the process of trying to figure them out? So if you're an athlete here, y'all need to take your ass to therapy. Like, bottom line, you need to find a therapist. Not your mom, not your grandma, not your friend, not a TikTok therapist that you follow. You need to go and find a therapist before you mentally hurt yourself and you can't get out of that position. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you for that. A lot of athletes have experienced a lot of trauma. I'm working with a former athlete now who I didn't even realize when I was working with him that his family, his father was abusive, and it was just unbelievable. And as he started telling me this now, and I'm thinking, you never mentioned this to me when we were working together when you were in college. And so it really is critical. I try to open the door. I ask so many questions. I ask everything except why. How, when, where, who, what. And that helps them share more information. Some of them have improved their relationships with people who have abused them. And what I mean by that is recognizing I can minimize my exposure to you if you're going to create more chaos and confusion in my life. And so that's the way that I work with them, but it is critical. It is so much. I wrote a note here to myself because I wanted to mention it, and I know some people in this room remember the Dixie Classic in North Carolina back in the day when it was NC State, UNC, Wake Forest, and Duke. And it was just the college teams playing against each other basketball. And then about the 10th or 11th year, people started approaching the athletes for points shaving. And out the window went the Dixie Classic. And so that's how quickly things can change when people are trying to approach athletes, and as much as we can do to support them, to keep them from falling in the trap, I think we just have to. We have to.
Great, thank you. I think we had a question back here at this table.
Yeah, how you doing? My name is Moore from DSU, and my question is, what are some ways universities can help student athletes prepare for life after sports?
Did you say prepare for life after school?
After sports.
After sports. What are some ways universities can prepare student athletes for life after sports?
I can go. I think from the start, like, you know, when you come into that institution, one thing that I always tell recruits that I meet with and the coaching staffs and their families is when you come in, you're part of my family now. And, you know, your parents are entrusting me and this coaching staff with this last step before you're a full-grown adult. And so I take that very seriously. We take that very seriously within our department. But like I said, you know, it's different departments have different resources. But I think, you know, it starts with you. And you need to take that first step of saying, like, hey, like, I know this is coming to an end. Go to your academic advisor. If you don't have an academic advisor or like athletic academic support, go to the career center on campus. Get in with your professors. Like, you've got to figure out ways to make connections, because we can shove all the career development programming down your throat that we want, but until you take that step and you own it, you're never going to flourish within it. But I think it's just the constant conversation. And your head coach has to be bought into it as well, because I can tell you something until I'm blue in the face, and you'll be like, oh, Taylor, whatever, I'm not listening to you. But when your head coach says it, then it's a completely different story.
We usually, one of the things we were really intentional about when we published our paper was the fact that student comes before athlete in the description of who you are. You are a student athlete. And we've heard a lot about the importance of making sure that you're thinking about your academic career as well. And I think that's the key. You have this opportunity to walk away with both a degree and your experiences as an athlete. And they should be able to go together to prepare you for what comes next.
The other thing I will add to that is I talk to the athletes about what I do for a living. You have me. Think about the athletes who don't have anyone. But it is important to let them know the same way you needed support, believe me, the ones coming behind you have even more, because they are exposed to so much more. And so you can relate and you can be supportive. And a lot of them are pursuing this now. So I'm happy that they are looking at opportunities in athletics other than coaching, but being able to support athletes in the mental health and addictions arenas.
And to add on to as well, preparing for life after sports, I would just say, begin preparing now. Like just LinkedIn, resume building, the effort has to be there to begin to prepare yourself for when you do make the transition. I would say as well, go to those office hours, speak to your professor, speak to your academic advisor, look into the industry you're looking into. Start connecting with those people on LinkedIn, reaching out, seeing what you can do to prepare yourself, and begin those conversations, because the network is huge when it comes to when you move on and go into transition to your industry. I would say as well, the equation I kind of always stuck by, preparation plus opportunity equals success. It really makes a difference when you prepare yourself. Try to make sure you install it early as possible. Begin to prepare yourself, so when you do have opportunity, when the opportunity does come up, you're ready to go.
I think, can I add one last thing?
Absolutely.
I think one of the biggest things, and I'm sorry, I just completely forgot to mention it, speak up. Yeah, you're a person first. You are a person outside of the sport that you play. You are a person outside of being a student. So really develop those interests. Look into take advantage of all the opportunities that you can that are outside both of those realms. That's one thing that I always tell the students that I work with is yes, you've come in here to be a student athlete, but I also want you to have the opportunity to be an 18 to 22-year-old kid. I want you to be able to go and connect with different people, to take advantage of different events, to really explore your interests outside of your sport, outside of your studies, because you're so much more than a student, and you're so much more than an athlete.
Is that better? Okay.
Okay.
We got it.
Very back.
Hi, my name is Edmund Otieno. I'm a graduate student in sports management at Mount St. Mary's University, and I had a question for Mr. Jalen Williamson and another for Ms. Anita Daniel. So, Mr. Williamson, having seen the impact as a college student athlete and also now in a role in the NFL Players Association, are there some tools that you could share or that the NFL Players Association can share with college athletes, or at least even college programs, to help with post-sports career of student athletes? You've probably seen some veterans retiring in the NFL and helping transition them from their sports careers into post-NFL life. And for Ms. Anita Daniels, having worked in your role in the colleges in North Carolina, are you facing support from coaches, head coaches, and assistant coaches with regards to your work with student athletes at the social level, helping them with their mental health and that side of things? And are colleges supporting more work with social workers in college teams? Thank you.
Well, I'll start off. I would say as well, one thing I've noticed during my tenure with both organizations and NFLPA, financial literacy is huge right now. Especially with NIL being involved now, from the collegiate aspect, I think if you can implement some type of financial literacy or some type of, NFLPA, we have a financial advisors program right now that we have, and we actually vet FAs and approve them into our program that allows active players to see exactly who we allow in our program, so they can choose from their financial advisors. If you understand financial literacy early as possible, start doing your research, start making sure you're prepared. When that abundance of cash flow or influx actually come in from NIL, or whether you transition to the NFL, you're prepared and ready to go. You don't want to be, as you mentioned, which it does happen sometimes. Sometimes you've been in the NFL or professional sports, and sometimes things happen and you're not prepared, you're not ready to go, and unfortunately you're in a situation where you're trying to navigate and pivot and figure out how things can go. So I would just suggest that within the collegiate space, finances is huge. If you can begin to touch upon that early as possible, I think that would be vital for student athletes.
And I will say, yes, we are seeing more coaches that want their athletes to be healthy, because if they aren't healthy, it is difficult for them to perform the way the coaches would like for them to perform. And that includes addictions as well, if they are drinking or if they are smoking marijuana. And we all know, I mean, we can pretend, but we know that it happens. And so coaches are asking us to help them transition and support them through some of these tougher situations. So we're having more and more coaches that understand the value, because, you know, I think about, I think her name is, her last name is Holzclaw, and she spoke at Duke at right before a women's basketball game, and she was saying, her coach, which I think was Pat Head Summit, was saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And she admitted having a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, but she did not know what was going on, and the coach did not know what to do. And she was finally able to get the help that she needed, but the coach was like, I just need you to play basketball. I don't really know what's going on, so we have to find the help. And now they understand the value, and the doctor who mentioned about trauma, a lot of athletes have been through a lot of trauma, and how we can help them make the transition will help them perform better in whatever their sport is, as well as academically. So we have to look at the whole person.
Yeah, Dave Ridpath, I'm a professor at Ohio University. This is mainly for Taylor, but I think everyone else can comment on this. I think it's all well and good what you were saying. Maybe it is idealistic. We want you to be a student first. We want you to be participating in other things. We want you to be a whole person. But let's be honest, the industry is taking more and more time away. Is it time that we examine alternatives to percentage of degree, satisfactory progress, more flexible scheduling? Let's be honest, academically, football is one of the easiest sports to manage. Let's talk about baseball. Let's talk about softball. Let's talk about golf, when kids are actually missing essentially a half semester of classes, if not more. The system that we have, we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. The industry isn't going to change, and if we do move to an employment unionization model, why not make the academics fit differently? Instead of saying, you have to be a full-time student, we've gotten more to, and no offense, Taylor, but we've gotten more into what I call eligibility maintenance, rather than real access to an education, which we have all agreed, I believe today, is the real path to social mobility. But if you are graduating with a meaningless degree, and sadly when I worked in college athletics, I still had senior athletes who could not read. And we did, and I say we, I just mean that generally, not this room, but essentially we didn't care, right? Because the coach had to win, and that was the priority. So should we look at doing it a little bit differently?
I think we should always look into doing it differently. I think there's always ways to improve. But I mean, I think by doing that, then we take away the premise of being a student athlete. And then I look at, you know, like I also work with our men's and women's tennis teams.
Taylor, I'm going to bail you out here.
Okay.
And I was going to jump in, but maybe you'll do it.
So, yeah, that was a hot question. You did not prepare me for that at dinner last night.
Taylor mentioned earlier staying till 8 o'clock to make sure that a student was able to get tutoring. Student athletes aren't the only ones who are facing time poverty. They're not the only ones who have crazy schedules. Like 30% of our students go full-time across the board. Everybody else is going part-time. It's because they've got work. They've got dependent care responsibilities. They've got other family responsibilities. So the more we can make flexible approaches to asynchronous and synchronous learning, classes that are 6 to 9 at night instead of 1 to 2 in the afternoon, the more we can change our higher ed approach to recognize that all students are humans first, it's going to help the student athletes as well as all the other students. So I think, yes, the answer is we should be thinking about creative ways, but it's not just for the athletes. There's a huge coalition of folks who need those supports to be flexible.
And I was going to add, which might change things too, is, I think about how much the coaches are paid versus the athlete scholarships. And what if that was spread, even if it's not equally, closer to equally, because then it seems like if graduation rates and a decent degree that you can get a job with when you graduate are part of the coach's salary, then that might help. But as long as I'm winning and my salary is increasing and students may or may not graduate, or they might have a degree that they end up working at Target, then I do not think that's fair. And I would like for us to address that.
Then I think too, we get into the whole discussion of should a coach be able to receive a bonus on top of the work that an academic staff does. Because I can tell you, a head coach isn't necessarily sitting down with a student athlete and saying, okay, you've got to do X, Y, and Z to be successful. But they sure don't mind taking that $750,000 check to the bank to cash it once we meet our APR goals or our GSR goals or our team GPA goals.
Let me, just got a couple minutes left. I was going to just wrap it up. Okay, you've got the last question. There's a couple minutes left.
Yeah, I'm Greg Gardner. I'm here representing the Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. My real job that actually pays money is faculty athletic trainer at the University of Tulsa. One of my concerns for a long time has been transitioning kids out of college athletics and into the real world with perhaps minimal healthcare literacy. To be an independent consumer of healthcare for our college athletes, and what role do the athletic trainers play in that in the NFLPA?
That's a great question. Within the NFLPA, we do have a mental health department along with athletic department too as well, with the training aspect too as well. I think that, being on the team side, the training is huge, is important, is vital. But we do have things in place as far as the NFLPA in reference to insurance, special conditions, different things that we actually have in place for the athletes, just in case anything does happen to them. I was a injured athlete too as well. My senior year, as I mentioned, tore my labrum in my hip, went alongside the same treatments that you just mentioned too as well. Had an injury on Friday, surgery was done on Wednesday. It was pretty quick turnaround too as well, but I think that should be across the board too. Pretty standard for athletes as they transition out and go into the real world.
All right. That is our time. This is a fantastic conversation, a real joy to be a part of it. A warm thank you, please, for Taylor, Jalen, Christine, and Nina.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time and expertise again. Panel session 2 will begin at 11 a.m. sharp.